Is he stealing? Did he have parliamentary approval? And how is this even possible? Welcome to another Northern Perspective Fact Check, everyone. There's been a story going around the internet that Mark Carney is stealing $33 billion of our taxpayer money without parliamentary approval. Is he stealing? Did he have parliamentary approval? And how is this even possible? Well, before we get to those questions, we want to remind everybody of a video that we did back on April 11th, and it might look familiar. Let's take a look. Now, let's get to the next scandal, which is the $40 billion theft by the Liberals from the Governor General. So this started circulating on the internet a couple of weeks ago. I think it was last week actually, because this was dropped on April the 1st. Ironically, April Fools. So this is a order in council that was published via the Governor General, and this is what it says.
Whereas the President of the Treasury Board reports that there is no appropriation for the payment of sums mentioned in the schedule, amounting in the aggregate to $40,343,209,650, and the appropriate ministers have reported that the payment of these sums is urgently required for the public good. And whereas Parliament is not in session and there is no other appropriation under which payment of these sums may be made, therefore, Her Excellency the Governor General in Council, on the recommendation of the President of the Treasury Board under subsection 31 of the Financial Administration Act, directs the preparation of a special warrant to be signed by the Governor General authorizing the payment effective April 1st, 2025, of the sums mentioned in the schedule, amounting in the aggregate to $40,343,209,650 to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. So first, to understand what all this means, I think we need to look at the parliamentary financial cycle, and Ryan's going to explain that for us.
So this is the advantage of having worked in the government previously. So this is actually taken from the Green Book, which they have posted online. Let's start in February. Why are we starting in February? Well, because that is when the budget presentation is supposed to happen. So in all companies, and the government is just one big company, you plan for your budget months and months in advance. Now, for government budgets, spoiler alert, agencies and the government itself would start to be talking about the budget all the way back in October of that previous year. And since the government financial cycle goes from April 1st to March 31st, not the calendar year of January 1st to December 31st, this is why this seems a little skewed. So budget presentation happens in February, and then the tabling of the main estimates for that budget happens March 1st. So this happens in OGO. We've kind of covered this before. This also happens in the Standing Committee of Public Accounts and Finance and many of the other committees. And they go over these estimates as to what agencies are expected to receive when it comes to these estimates in terms of a dollar figure. Now, the most important aspect here is that one of the justifications that people are saying, oh, well, Parliament was prorogued and the Liberals are stealing money, and how are they able to get this money and all of this? And people are actually pointing to some facts that are correct and that we've talked about on Northern Perspective, which is any new money in a parliamentary cycle must be voted on and approved within the House of Commons via a supply vote. So everything that I said back then and everything Tony said back then is still correct. Now, before I go through this explanation, I just want to show you what has been circulating the internet, and this is why that previous video will look familiar. Whereas the President of the Treasury Board reports that there is no appropriation for the payment of the sums set out in the schedule, amounting in the aggregate to $33,102,000,000 and the appropriate ministers have reported that the payment of these sums is urgently required for the public good, and whereas Parliament is not in session and there is no other appropriation under which the payment of these sums may be made, therefore Her Excellency the Governor in Council, on the recommendation of the President of the Treasury Board under subsection 31 of the Financial Administration Act, directs that a special warrant be prepared to be signed by the Governor General authorizing the payment effective May 16th, 2025 of the sum set out in the schedule, amounting in the aggregate to $33,102,676,499 to be made out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund. So that's a identical order in council to the one that we talked about in April, except for the dollar amount. So think of it this way, folks. Parliament has not been in session since December of last year. Remember, there was supposed to have been a supply vote in March, but Mark Carney called an election. At this point, we would be expecting supply votes to occur within Parliament if Parliament was still sitting, and we would be neck deep in discussing the budget. It would already be going to committee, and then they'd be getting ready to vote on it in June. The problem is there is no budget for this year. And the budget was expected to be somewhere in the neighborhood of, 460 or $500 billion, something like that. So when you look at these amounts that need to be actually released, if you multiply them by around 12, it actually gets close to that budget. But it's a little less, in some cases a lot less, because what is being approved in these warrants is the money that keeps the lights on in the government. That's it. No special projects, no bells and whistles. This is to keep the lights on. It keeps contractors being paid. It keeps employees being paid. It keeps vendors being paid. It keeps the electricians being paid. It keeps the utility bills being paid. So these warrants are going to be required month over month until we actually get a new budget. So they are not issuing money that isn't required to keep the government literally functioning. Because if we stopped, if we didn't spend any of this money, all of the public servants would essentially be working for free. Wouldn't that be something? But they would cease to work, and then taxes don't get filed. You get no tax returns. You get no passports, nothing like that. All of that would stop. We would have no military. Let's not start on the jokes on the military, but this is where we come down to this. So these warrants are required and are only allowable to happen when Parliament has been dissolved. You can't issue these warrants when Parliament is prorogued. You can only do them when Parliament is dissolved, because there is no mechanism for Parliament to immediately return to actually vote on these supply bills. So this is not Mark Carney taking $40 billion or $33 billion and shoving it into Brookfield or spending it on liberal retreats or anything like that. This is literally the government of Canada continuing to run. And here's further proof, because at the bottom of these orders and councils, what you see here is these are all of the government agencies that you see scrolling down here, and you see the amounts that they're going to be receiving as part of this order in council for the next month. And there's probably going to be another one issued early June, depending on when Parliament comes back. If Parliament comes back, at the beginning of June, then we may see a urgent supply vote to actually continue the next warrant to keep the government funded until we get an actual budget. So hopefully this clears everything up for everybody. This is not theft. It is not unconstitutional. There's specific mechanisms within our parliamentary process to allow this to happen when the government literally cannot vote for supply to keep the rest of the government functioning. But thanks to those of you who brought this to our attention again. Remember, make sure you fact check everything that you see on the internet. Use the SIFT method, and keep holding everybody to account, including us.